do not work by a specific receptor or by specific unique mechanism. They will have a non-specific mechanism. So the learning objectives of our today's lecture are to understand what are the different stages of anesthesia, how anesthetic agent starts acting on the various parts of our body, and how anesthesia progresses further. The second objective of our lecture is to understand what are the different mechanisms. As I already told you, there is not going to be a one single mechanism. Every anesthetic will work via its own mechanism, by its own different mechanism. So next aim of our lecture is that to understand the mechanisms of action of volatile and intravenous general anesthetics, and very importantly, to know what is the role of a pre-anesthetic. Because it's not only that anesthetic agent is given to the person and person will move into the anesthesia. You have to prepare a patient to move into the anesthesia. Because ultimately you cannot forget that anesthetic agents are going to depress the vital centers of our brain. And therefore the care needs to be taken in priority that those centers will not get affected to a very greater extent in an irreversible manner, which may cost the life of the patient. And therefore, certain pre-anesthetic medications are required to be given to avoid certain complications. I have forgot here to mention one more learning objective, and I will add to it in my presentation afterwards. That is, certain post-anesthetic medications are also required to be given. When the patient recovers from the anesthesia, then also there are various symptoms which occur. You must have observed also, you must have come across observing such symptoms, that when patient comes out of anesthesia, he may vomit, he may become hyper, okay, or he may complain about certain symptoms. It rarely happens, it happens. So that's the reason why you have to give post-anesthetic medications. So when anesthesia is given, first you have to prepare a patient for anesthesia by giving pre-anesthetic medication. And when the anesthesia person is recovering from anesthesia, then also you have to give certain medication. For example, if the patient has undergone any surgery, as long as he is under anesthesia, he will not perceive a pain. But as he starts recovering from the anesthesia, obviously the pain is going to be there, which he may not be able to tolerate. And that is why you have to prepare the patient by giving certain post-anesthetic drugs like analgesic, opioidal analgesic, and so on. In detail, we will discuss it as we come to that point in my lecture. So let us first go step by step, understand what are the different stages of anesthesia. Or before that, let us understand what is history of anesthesia. Once these learning objectives are clear, now we are moving to the history of anesthesia. So what are the contents of my lecture? Introduction, history, what are the different types of anesthetic agent, what are the different signs and the stages of anesthesia, what are going to be the mechanism of action of inhaled anesthetic, what are the different organ systems which get affected by different types of anesthesia like volatile anesthetic, and a very important part, that is what are going to be the different toxicities related to anesthesia. Now, there can be various types of the toxic effects which can occur when a patient is given anesthetic agent. And then in detail, we will learn about various types of IV anesthetics and very commonly used volatile anesthetics. So let us start first with a introduction. These are some pictures which you won't believe that when general anesthetic agents were not there, at that time, these were the methods which were used. A surgeon which is cutting with his big saw here, or a very painful operation of the 17th century, you can see over here. A surgeon torturing his patient for giving some cuts or, for carrying out the operation, and the patient is running away. I know some of you might be laughing at it, but these are the real facts which were there. And a surgery was a horror for a patient. So in Joseph Priestley discovered first this N2O in 1773. Then the Davy experimented with N2O and he reported that there is a loss of pain, but there is a sensation of euphoria. Then in 1842, there was a first use of a ether. Now here, this is a very interesting story that Crawford used a ether, but he did not publicize because he thought that I will keep this secret with me so that more and more patients will can be gained out of it, because I can perform a surgery without, without any trouble to the patient. And so he kept that secret with him and he did not publish his result. And later on, it's a William Morton, a dentist, who used same diethyl ether for his first demonstration of surgical anesthesia, and he published the data. Then there was a fight between the Crawford and the William Morton that who has first discovered. Obviously, the credit went to the Morton because he had published the data and the Crawford had not published the data. So this is a very important lesson for you, because in future you may become a good scientist or a researcher, and then the publication of your data becomes very important. You may discover something very unique, or you can discover something which will be useful to the people, but if you don't publish, then neither the people are benefited nor you are getting a credit out of your discovery. So this is one story which I wanted to share with you. Then later on in 1847, it is a James Simpson who discovered the use of chloroform. And you won't believe that Victoria Queen, her 7th child, was born under the anesthesia, which was given chloroform, and then entire debate on the use of the anesthesia was stopped over there. Then in 1930s, when wonderful drugs known as intravenous barbiturates came into the market, and they did a wonders of inducing anesthesia. Then in 1940, a skeletal muscle relaxant, which you already learned, D-tubercularine, came into the market, and anesthesia became more simpler because you can induce muscle relaxation and can perform the surgeries even more smoothly. Then another wonderful drug anesthetic came into the market in 1956, which is a halogenated hydrocarbon halothane, and a similar line, isoflurane, which has now become very popular. So this is the entire journey of general anesthetics, the history of the general anesthetic. The general anesthetic and what are their pharmacological effects, if you ask me, then the anesthesia mainly involves 3 main changes. We all know that there is a loss of consciousness. So person become unconscious. There is a loss of response to the pain. So analgesia is there. And very importantly, there is a loss of motor reflexes. Patient cannot respond to any stimuli. And that is a very important property or a pharmacological effect of any anesthetic agent. Now you are also going to learn in your syllabus local anesthetic. Then the question arises that what is the difference between a general anesthetic and a local anesthetic? Yes, there is a difference. Both are anesthesia, both cause loss of sensation. But why it is termed as a local anesthetic? Because it causes a loss of sensation of a pain or any reflexes at a localized site, at a particular targeted site. Suppose I am applying a local anesthetic across my tip, then my consciousness is, I can see, I can even realize that a doctor or dentist is doing something across my teeth, but I will not perceive a pain. My reflexes across that area around my tooth where the anesthesia has been administered are lost. So it is only the loss of sensation and loss of pain sensation is occurring only in a targeted area, in a localized area, and that is why it is a local anesthetic, because only local, that is peripheral nerves are going to get depressed, or they are going to get anesthetized after administration of local anesthesia. That doesn't happen in case of a general anesthesia. In general anesthesia, it's the entire body, all the reflexes of your entire body, which will be lost in the general anesthesia. So the general anesthetics don't work on a peripheral neurons, but they majorly work on a vital centers of our brain. And that is a major difference between a local anesthetic and a general anesthetic. If you're going to design a general anesthetic, the passage of the drug from the peripheral circulation to the brain is mandatory. Whereas when you're designing a local anesthetic, the passage of the drug from the peripheral circulation into the peripheral neuron becomes mandatory, and it is not required to cross blood-brain barrier or reach to the vital centers of the brain. So that is what, as a pharmacist, as a drug designer, you have to understand that there is a chemical difference between the local anesthetic and general anesthetic. There is a kinetic difference between the general anesthetic and local anesthetic. And also there is a dynamic difference. Pharmacodynamic, that is the site of the action, also differs in case of a local anesthetic and general anesthetic. I hope to this I'm clear. Now let's move on to the next. That when I say there's a loss of sensation, then what all things are going to get depressed by general anesthetic? A very important and the first thing which will be depressed will be the sensation. There will be absence of the intraoperative pain when you are performing the operation. So sensations have lost. Cognition, yes. There is an absence of intraoperative awareness. If you ask the patient what the doctor did while operating you, he will not be able to recollect it. The absence of intraoperative awareness, absence of recall of the events, so that will be lost. Absence of any movement or adequate muscular relaxation will take place with the general anesthetic. And autonomic functions, where there will be absence of hemodynamic responses, blood pressure will fall down, heart rate will fall down, respiratory rate will fall down, there won't be tears, that is the lacrimal secretion will not be there after giving a cut, there won't be flushing or sweating type of the responses after giving anesthesia. So you can see that anesthesia works not only on a sensory domain. Local anesthetics will work only on a sensory domain, but it also works on a cognitive domain, on the motor domain, and on the autonomic domain. And that is why general anesthetics will be preferred for carrying out major surgical operations. As we have studied about its effect, we should also know about its adverse effects. The adverse effects after the anesthesia usually, which is observed, is a nauseating sensation or the vomiting. As we already learned that autonomic nervous system is going to get depressed, certain vasomotor center is going to get depressed across the medulla oblongata. There is going to be a cardiovascular depression. There is going to be a respiratory depression. Sometimes certain anesthetic agent, if repeatedly used, may lead to liver as well as, or used in a very high doses, will lead to the liver or the kidney toxicity. And since anesthetics are volatile in nature, they are required to be inhaled, and therefore there may be sometimes irritation to the respiratory tract because of certain volatile anesthetics. So sometimes a question which is asked, that write a note on the adverse effects of general anesthetic, then these all points must be covered. That vomiting, CVS depression, respiratory depression, liver hepatotoxicity, nephrotoxicity, and irritation to the respiratory tract. And you have to elaborate this point. We will also elaborate during the course of lecture. Now, when we talk about the general anesthetic protocols, there is no single agent which will meet our all criteria. We want a loss of sensation. We want a loss of the pain sensation. We also want a relaxation of the muscles completely. So one common drug cannot serve all these purposes. So whenever anesthesia is given, it's a combination of the drugs. Obviously, there is a major anesthetic agent which will cause a loss of consciousness. But the other requirements which are there, skeletal muscle relaxation, fall in BP, decrease in the heart rate, decrease in the lacrimal secretion, decrease in the bronchial secretion, to serve all these other requirements while performing the operation can be achieved by giving pre-anesthetic medication. The complications after the anesthesia can be reduced by giving post-anesthetic medication. So when we say that a general anesthesia is given or a protocol of the general anesthesia is developed, it will never be a single agent. It will be a combination of many drugs to maximize the favorable effect and to minimize the untoward effect or the adverse effect. One must remember as a pharmacologist that anesthetics have a low therapeutic index. So anybody, any health professional cannot give anesthesia. There has to be a trained person who will be delivering anesthesia. And therefore, there are always MDs, which are only authorized to give, or who have a specialization in that field, are only authorized to give anesthesia. This is a major reason over here. You can see the value of the ED50 is also shown and value of the TD50 is also shown. And you can see how much narrow gap is there between the ED50 and TD toxicity dose in 50% of the test population. And you, even if by a simple error, if the rate or amount of anesthesia crosses this ED50 value, it is going to cost the life of the patient. And therefore, the protocol has to be designed very carefully. Not only that, but the anesthesiologist has to be there to administer anesthesia. It cannot be done by a ward boy, or it cannot be done by the nurses also. There has to be a MD anesthesiologist to administer anesthesia. Now, as I told you that anesthesias are very rarely used for the minor operations. Yes, but some minor operations where you need to give oral sedatives and sometimes a regional local anesthesia may be combined with it. When you need a conscious sedation, this is something, type of a general anesthesia where intravenous benzodiazepines are given. Certain opioidal analgesics are given because benzodiazepines are known for their muscle relaxation. They are known for their sedative and hypnotic effect. And when you're giving analgesic in combination with it, you're reducing the pain also. So you're serving all purposes. You are reducing the hypnotic effect is there. Patient is moving into a deep sleep. At the same time, muscle relaxation is there and the loss of the pain sensation is there. And patient is conscious, but there is a conscious sedation, and a minor surgical operations can be performed. In major surgical procedures, obviously you have to first give a preoperative sedative, like you have to give certain anxiolytic drugs which will induce amnesia, certain muscle relaxants like butyropiramide. You have to give anticholinergic drugs like atropine, which will limit the secretions. Then you can, once you have prepared the patient to tolerate anesthesia, then you go for induction of the anesthesia, where initially you cannot go directly to the volatile anesthetic. You have to put your drug or anesthetic drug into the circulation so that there will be rapid induction, and therefore IV anesthetics will be given initially, like thiopentol, propofol, etomidate, or certain benzodiazepine, especially midazolam type of a drug, which is a benzodiazepine derivative. And once the anesthesia is induced and you see or you observe the patient, you monitor its blood pressure and the ECG and even the EMG for not EMG and EEG for that matter, a myograph as well as the electroencephalograph, and you come to know that yes, that now the patient is moving into a sedation, is moving into a hypnosis, and gradually reduce his consciousness is also wearing off, and now you can put the patient into a deep anesthesia to actually perform a surgical operation, which can be done by giving inhalation anesthetic and IV anesthetic simultaneously. So this is the entire process for a major surgical operation. This is the entire protocol which is followed for a major surgical operations. So because you need to understand that general anesthetic are not the drugs which after entering into the circulation will go to their receptor and work. They have to move from the alveoli. First, they have to move into the alveoli. After alveoli, the drug has to pass or come into the circulation. After peripheral circulation, entering into the peripheral circulation, it has to move into the brain. So there are three compartments through which general anesthetics have to pass. The first into the air of the air, that means in the air sac along with the oxygen which we are inhaling. Then from the air sac into the peripheral circulation, that is our blood. And from the blood, it has to move into our brain. So you can say that there are two barriers which the drug has to cross. The one is a capillary barrier and another is a blood-brain barrier. The capillary barrier is between alveoli and the capillaries, and the next blood-brain barrier is between the peripheral circulation and the brain. So you cannot say that my drug will be only lipid soluble because it needs to reach to the brain. But the drug should also have some amount of the hydrophilicity or a polar nature so that your drug moves from the air into the circulation also. If your drug is highly non-polar, then the chances of moving into the blood are reduced in that case. So it's both lipophilicity and hydrophilicity. It's a game of both the properties of the molecule, which will determine that how quickly your drug will move from the lungs into the circulation and from circulation into the brain. And that is why every anesthesia will differ in its rate of induction, in its rate of maintenance, and its rate of recovery, because of these different barriers which the anesthetic will have to cross. Now coming to the anesthetic, which substantially reduce the global cerebral metabolic rate and blood flow with a degree of regional heterogeneity characteristics to the same to the anesthetic agent. Now, which is then part of our brain, which usually is a common site for all types of the anesthetic agent, is a thalamus. From the neuro brain imaging studies, it has been found out that thalamus appears to be the common site of the modulation for several anesthetic agents, but it may be a secondary to the cortical effect. So first effect which of any anesthetic is taking place is in the cortex. And then the secondary common site which is found is a thalamic site. So stimulus dependent brain activation is preserved in the primary sensory areas. And that suggests that unconsciousness cannot be explained by the cortical deafferentation or a diminution of the cortical sensory reactivity. So the effect of general anesthetic is a functional and effective connectivity varies depending upon the agent. That's what I was telling you, the dose of that drug and a network of the areas which are going to get targeted or studied. So at an anesthetic depth, which is characterized by the subject's unresponsiveness, is a partial and it is not complete. And there is always a reduction in the connectivity. The areas may remain intact, but a connection between the two areas of the brain are usually getting disturbed in case of anesthesia. So rather than saying that a particular area is getting blocked by the agent, it's a connectivity between the different vital areas of the brain which are going to get blocked. Like when we say that there is a loss of sensation, the connectivity between a spinal cord and the brain is getting blocked. And therefore, maybe the sensory impulses are there, but they're blocked to move into the brain. And therefore, there is no sensation. So perception is blocked. The functional connectivity of the frontoparietal areas of our brain or association cortex is often reduced. But a causal role of this change for the loss of consciousness always remains uncertain. Still, the clear mechanism is not yet been elucidated. The functional connectivity of non-specific thalamic regions or the nuclei has been found to be preferentially getting reduced by certain anesthetic agent like propofol. There is also higher order thalamocortical connectivity, which also has been found to be attenuated with certain anesthetic agent. So there is a change in the functional connectivity during the anesthesia induction, emergence, and when the patient is emerging out of the anesthesia and when he is undergoing induction of the anesthesia, it's not a mirror image to each other. And therefore, the recovery from the anesthesia may be involving increase in the functional connectivity above the normal level, above the normal wakeful baseline. So when a patient moves into anesthesia and when he is recovering, the activation of the areas which are taking place in the brain may be above the baseline areas. So anesthetic loss of consciousness is not a block of corticofugal information transfer, but it is a distortion of the higher order cortical information integration. The prime candidate for functional network of the forebrain, which plays a very critical role in maintaining our consciousness, are those which are usually located on the posterior parietal and cingulate precuneus regions and the non-specific thalamus. So these are the areas which usually get affected by the administration of anesthetic agent. So what are the different requirements of a general anesthesia? The various requirements of the general anesthesia is that pre-medication, now it's very clear in your mind. Another is induction of the anesthesia as it is shown in the video. There can be intubation, which or a mask can be used for administration of both IV as well as inhalation anesthetic. The third important requirement is that after you induce the patient into anesthesia, you have to maintain the patient into anesthesia. You have to control his blood pressure, especially heart rate and respiratory rate. And the last but very important, the patient has to emerge out of anesthesia smoothly. And after he comes out of the anesthesia, what you have to do is you have to give a post-operative pain control. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 different steps or 5 requirements when you are putting the patient into a general anesthesia. So accordingly, you can divide the stages of the general anesthesia as induction, initial entry into surgical anesthesia, maintenance, continuous monitoring with the medication, maintain the depth of anesthesia, rate of ventilation, balance of the fluid, all hemodynamic parameters, and you have to control entire homeostatic mechanism of the body. In emergence or a resumption of normal CNS function is important. Very important is a resumption of the respiratory rate back to the normal, because otherwise patient may pass into the coma, or there may be a respiratory paralysis which may cost the life of the patient. So these are various stages of anesthesia. Now if you look at the order of the depression of the CNS, as I already told you that it's a cortical centers which will get anesthetized first. Then it will be followed by the basal ganglia, then the spinal cord, and then the medulla. So there are different stages of anesthesia. The first stage is analgesia. The second is a stage of excitement where patient become aggressive in this stage. First, there is a loss of the pain sensation, and then there is a patient who become aggressive. This is a very, very critical stage, which if remains for a longer time, it becomes difficult for the surgeon to perform the operation. And here we have to take, or a skill of the anesthesiologist is there, that how quickly he passes the patient out of the stage of excitement and puts him into a deep surgical anesthesia, which is a third stage. That is a stage 3, which is a surgical anesthesia. This is a stage where actual operations are carried out. Actually, surgical operations are carried out. If the depth of the anesthesia further increases, the patient may move into a stage 4, which if the patient doesn't escape quickly, or if it remains for a longer time, then there is always a chance of a death. And therefore, there will be always the efforts by the anesthesiologist to maintain the patient or to pass the patient from stage 1 to the stage 3 and maintain the patient into the stage 3 for a sufficient duration as long as the surgical operations are carried out. Now, this is an overview of the various phases of anesthesia. Now, if you go more into a detail of these stages, that is stage of analgesia, the first parameter which you can learn is the respiration, where you can find that respiration is normal. What about the movements of our eye or ocular movements? There is a voluntary control. The patient can close his eyelids, can change the direction of the eyeball. Pupil size also you will find is normal. The eye reflexes are normal. Only the sensation of the pain is lost. So this is the first stage of analgesia, or anesthesia is termed as a stage of the analgesia, where there is a loss of sensation. Majorly there is a loss of a pain sensation. Otherwise, you can see respiration is normal, ocular movements are normal, pupil size is normal, reflexes, eyelid reflexes, corneal reflexes are intact, muscle tone is also normal, and respiratory response to any incision done on the skin is also normal. Then as the anesthesia progresses further, what happens is that now cerebral cortex is getting, the connections of the cerebral or synaptic connectivity of the cerebral cortex is getting blocked by our drugs. And what gets completely blocked is the inhibitory control of the cerebral cortex. As the inhibitory control of the cerebral cortex is lost, the excitation takes place rapidly because there is no inhibitory control now by the cerebral cortex. So all excitatory responses will supervene. And patient may shout, he may vomit, He may show the muscular contractions, withdrawal responses. And this is a very risky stage. It's not a comfortable stage where operations can be carried out. And therefore, the anesthesiologist skill is required, that he controls the rate of anesthesia and the depth of the anesthesia, that the patient passes out of the stage of excitement quickly and moves into the stage of surgical anesthesia. Let us understand what is happening in the stage of excitement, where the inhibitory control of cerebral cortex is inhibited. There you can see that a respiration rate is becoming rapid. Here, the ocular movement is about to reduce. The pupil size is increasing, they're dilated. The lid reflexes are reducing. There is a tense struggle of the muscles are contracting. And even there is not much effect on the respiration, but the muscular contractions are happening, which is not a good in case of the anesthesia, in case of a surgery. So the patient has to pass from the excitement immediately into the surgical anesthesia, where you can see the respiration rate is now restoring back to the normal in the plane 1. The ocular movements are slowly reducing. In plane 1, at the end of the plane 1 of the surgical anesthesia, they're completely lost, and in plane 2, they're completely lost. There is no, the eye movement get fixed. There is no eye motion. Even you can see pupil size is gradually reducing in the plane 1, even it is reducing in the plane 2, and gradually in plane 3 you can see it is further increasing. If the patient moves into the stage 4, you can see there is a complete dilation of the pupil. So we don't want such type of the stages to occur during the anesthesia. The pupil size has to go on decreasing. The corneal reflexes are intact in the plane 1, but in plane 2, you will see there is a loss of the corneal reflexes, and the light reflexes are completely abolished in the plane 4. In the muscle tone is gradually reducing and is completely relaxed in the plane 3, almost relaxed in the plane 3 and completely relaxed in the plane 4. And the muscle become completely flaccid in the stage 4. Respiratory responses to the skin gradually go on reducing in plane 1. They're completely abolished in the plane 2, and so on. They're completely abolished in the plane 3 and plane 4, and accidentally the patient moves into the stage 4. So these are the all markers with the help of which you can determine whether the patient is in the stage 2 or in the stage 3 or is moving into the stage 4, which is a dangerous phase of the anesthesia. So accordingly, it's a Goodell in 1920 who mainly referring to the anesthesia given by diethyl ether. He has outlined these 4 stages of general anesthesia. And then he divided the 3rd stage of anesthesia into the 4 planes. And these stages can be distinctly discerned with the majority of the volatile, or they can be referred to majority of the volatile anesthetics. So we can divide the 4 stages as stage 1, which is analgesia, stage 2, which we also term as stage of delirium or excitement, stage 3 as a stage of surgical anesthesia because major surgical operations are carried out over here, and stage 4, which is a stage of respiratory paralysis, which may lead to the death of the patient. So in stage of analgesia, where there is it stages from the beginning of inhalation of anesthetic to loss of consciousness, the gradual depression of the cortical centers which develop during this phase, and that is manifested by loss of sensation, remoteness, falling, suffocation, or visual or auditory aberrations. There is also feeling, a patient will complain about a feeling of warmth or increase in body temperature is also experienced by some of the individuals. Minor surgical procedures such as dental extraction can be carried out during this stage. The routine use of this stage is for such procedures which cannot be recommended as it is difficult to maintain this stage for a longer time. With continuous administration of anesthesia, the patient now moves into the 2nd stage of anesthesia, that is stage of delirium. Analgesia is produced before the loss of consciousness, that you have to remember. As the patient moves into the excitement stage, it may be associated with shouting, breath holding, tachypnea, or hyperventilation. And some of the manifestations are due to release of a lower centers from the inhibitory control of a higher centers like the cortical area, because there is a cortical depression and inhibitory area is getting depressed. So the inhibitory control over the various regions of our brain are lost and they are showing excitatory effects. The pupil dilates, there is a marked rise in blood pressure, there is increase in the heart rate due to release of adrenaline, there is a struggling increase of the skeletal muscle tone, retching, vomiting, which are undesirable during this stage. And therefore, very, very careful vigilance is required. And as far as possible, duration of this stage needs to be minimized either by giving pre-anesthetic medication and by using the skills of anesthesiologists. Once the stage is over, the patient moves into the stage of surgical anesthesia. More drug goes into deep breathing. Patient passes into the third stage, and that is characterized by gradual loss of reflexes, including regular respiration, complete relaxation of muscle, reflex activity is lost. And this is the stage where actual surgical operations are carried out. And therefore, it is divided into the 4 stages, which I have already talked with you. What happens in the plane 1, plane 2, plane 3, plane 4. This is a diagram taken from the Tripathi, and you can also refer Tripathi for general anesthetic. So this is what we learned in plane 1. Pupil is normal, eyeballs are roving. If the pupils are dilated before commencing the anesthesia or reflexively during the second stage, they assume normal size, then they dilate progressively. The respiration is full, regular, deep, and it is of the characteristic of thoraco-abdominal character. Both thoracic muscle and abdominal muscles are working normally. The blood pressure and the pulse rate are normal in the plane 1. The skeletal muscles are incompletely relaxed. Lead reflexes, swallowing, retching, and vomiting get completely abolished. Corneal reflex is present, but conjunctival reflex is lost. There is a loss of pharyngeal reflex, so epigastric intubation can be performed. Or a pharyngeal airway, you can pass the intubation at this stage. In the plane 2, there is a eyeball movement is completely stopped, they're fixed. Then the respiration is there, but it is reducing. It is still regular, but amplitude is diminished. Relaxation is adequate. There is increase in the respiratory rate, or breath holding is occurring in response to the skin incision, which gets abolished. Reflexes which are arising from the larynx are abolished, so endotracheal intubation can be performed in the plane 2. The plane 3, this is the beginning of asynchrony between the thoracic respiration and the abdominal respiratory movements. The blood pressure completely falls down. The intercostal muscles are gradually paralyzed, and the respiration is majorly because of abdominal muscle contraction, that is diaphragm. Thus, the costal margins retract with the descent of diaphragm in the latter part of the third plane. The pupillary light reflexes and corneal reflexes are completely lost, and the muscle relaxation have completely occurred. And this is the best stage to perform surgical operation. The plane 4, the paralysis of the intercostal muscle is complete. The pupils are dilated. There is no response to the light. The muscles become flaccid. The blood pressure is low. Secretions are getting progressively reduced from the plane 1 to plane 4, and they're completely abolished in the plane 4. Now, if by mistake the patient moves into the into the 4th stage, which is a stage of respiratory paralysis, it will be characterized by severe depression of a vital respiratory center located in medulla oblongata. Initially, there will be diaphragm contraction, which will become irregular. Accessory muscles of respiration may be brought into use, but eventually there will be complete arrest of the respiration due to the paralysis of even the accessory muscle and diaphragm. And respiratory arrest will ultimately lead to the vasomotor collapse, cardiac arrest, and that may lead to the death of the patient.